Hello and good afternoon, CSI157 Section 841 students from Anne Arundel Community College for the spring 2014 semester. Today's activity is going to be a recap and tutorial of PacketTracer 6.4.1.2. And so we're going to walk through each of the steps. So the objectives are going to be to verify the default router configuration, configure and verify the initial router configuration, save the running configuration file. So we're going to perform a number of router configuration steps here. We're going to secure access to the CLI and the console port using encrypted and plain text passwords. We're also going to configure messages for users logging into the router, and these banners will warn unauthorized users that access is prohibited. And then we're going to save our running config. So verify the default router configuration. So it says establish a console connection to R1. So we're going to come down here to the lightning bolt, which is our connections tab. We'll scroll along the bottom until we find the console connection. We'll come to PCA, and it will be the RS232, which is the console cable connection, not fast Ethernet 0. So I'll connect RS232, and we'll come to the router. And again, you can choose from a number of ports here, but we want the console port. All right. So click PCA, desktop tab, and then terminal. And it's going to be 9608, none, 1, and none. So these are correct. We'll click OK. And as you can see here, let's scoot this down a little bit. As you can see here, we are now connected to the console. All right, we're in UserExec mode right now. So we're on step number 2. So it says enter privilege exec mode, and we do that by typing the enable command or just en by itself. And that now puts us into privilege exec mode. So from here, we can type show running config, or I can simply type shrun. And this is going to show the running config. As you can see, we're running version 15.1 of the Cisco iOS. And we'll come down here. We can see the different interfaces. So what's the router's host name? So let's go back up to the top. Let's see what we've got here. So the host name is router. Simply router. All right. How many fast Ethernet interfaces does the router have? It should have 4 fast Ethernet and 2 gigabit Ethernet. So there's the 2 gigabit Ethernet interfaces. And that's going to be the next one. We've got 2 serial interfaces. That answers that question. And then it says how many fast Ethernet, and you can see we have 4. 010, 011, 12, and 13. Okay? And it says, what is the range of values shown for the VTY line? So we'll come down here, and it's VTY 0 through 4. And this is important because in some cases, you'll see VTY 0 to 15. But on this router, we simply have 4 virtual terminal lines. Okay, so we've verified or answered all the questions under section C, right? So now it says display the current contents of NVRAM. And so if you remember from the reading this past week, if I do a show startup config, it says startup config not present. So why does the router respond with the startup config, with the startup config is not present message? And if you remember from the reading, the reason for this is because we actually haven't saved off our configuration yet. So this is a brand new router, and so there has been no copy run start or copy running config to startup config, and we haven't done the write mem command or write memory, which does the same thing as the copy running config to startup config. And so since it's a brand new router, there is no configuration on it, and therefore that show startup config is not going to be there. So if I were to type in here write mem, and we haven't actually changed anything yet, but let's see what happens. And now if I type show startup config, sure enough, we now have the startup config. And so if this router were to reboot or to be reloaded or power cycled, this startup config would be the config that would be read when the router initially boots. And so the reason that we didn't see it the first time, again, right, the reason it says startup config is not present, that tells you that no running configuration has been saved off to the startup configuration. Okay, so we'll come back here, and now we're off to part number 2. It says configure and verify the initial router configuration. So to configure the parameters on a router, you may be required to move between various configuration modes. Notice how the prompt changes as you navigate. So we're going to configure the initial settings on R1. And if we have any problems remembering the commands, you can always go to the content for this topic to get help. Okay, so we're going to set the host name to R1. So we're going to go into global config mode, host name, and we'll call it R1. And as you can see, the name has immediately changed. Okay, we're going to set the passwords on the following lines. And so from here, I'm going to go to the interface mode, and we're going to go to, we'll go to line mode, line con 0, and the password should be let me in. And then the privileged exec unencrypted will be Cisco, and the privileged exec encrypted will be it's a secret. And then it wants us to encrypt all plain text passwords. So I'm going to exit out from here, and that's going to put me back into global configuration mode. And so is there a password command here? Oops, sorry, misspelled. So there is no password command, right, from the global config mode. So what we're going to need to do is it wants us to go ahead and set enable password. And as you can see here, 7 specifies a hidden password will follow. Line is the unencrypted clear text password. And then we can set the level for the password. So simply here, we're going to type in enable password Cisco, right? And so now if I were to exit out and do a show run, you can see that in order to get into the privileged exec mode, the unencrypted password is Cisco. But it also wants us to set an encrypted password. So what if I did global configuration mode by typing conf t, which is short for configure terminal, and then I typed in, whoops, enable, so there's a secret, right? Assign the privilege level secret. So let's see what happens if we do that. And then we can specify an encrypted password will follow, or we could say an unencrypted password will follow. And now it wants the encrypted password. It's a secret. All right, so I'm going to type in, and now if I do show run, you can see here that you've got the enable secret command set, and that's clearly encrypted. And so what that actually means is it's a secret, or what that represents. And then we have the enable password of Cisco, right? And then it says encrypt all plain text passwords. So from here, privilege exec mode, we're going into global configuration mode. And then I'm going to type in service, whoops, sorry, some problems typing today, service password encryption, and that's it. And that's going to encrypt all plain text passwords. So if you remember, we have the enable password here. It says Cisco. Further down the configuration file, even though I'm moving up here in the screen, and it doesn't show on the line. I'm looking for where we set it on the console line. And there we go. So the let me in is also in clear text. So when I enter this command in, service password encryption, let me go ahead and pop out here. I'm going to save my configuration off by doing the write memory command. And let's do a show run. Let's see what we see now. Okay, so as you can clearly see, this changed from Cisco to the MD5 encrypted hash. And then we'll come down here, and sure enough, the let me in on the line con 0, that password has also been encrypted. All right, so message of the day text says unauthorized access is strictly prohibited. So let's set that. And in fact, let's take a check here real quick. Let's check our results and see how we're doing. So if I do an assessment, we're good connecting to the console. We're good with our connection from the PC. All of our passwords are correct. The host name, startup config has been saved. All right, so we're going to make sure we get the login line here and then the banner MOTD. Okay. Oops, let's scroll back down here. All right. Okay, so the message of the day, unauthorized access is strictly prohibited. So let me pull the PCA back up here. And again, we're in privileged exec mode. I'm now going to go into global config mode, banner, whoops, MOTD, and this is where you put your delimiting character. So I typically like to use the $sign. And so that means that the $sign will signify that I'm finished entering in my message of the day. So now I'll type in, where is it? Unauthorized access is strictly prohibited. Okay. Put a period at the end there. And now when I'm done, I simply enter the $sign in. And this is going to tell the Cisco iOS that I've completed setting my banner. Okay. So step number 2 says to verify the initial settings in R1. And so now we're going to type in end, and I'm going to write my config out to make sure we don't lose anything. And it looks like we'll be saving the configuration a little further down. Okay, so it says exit the current console session until you see the following message. So there's the message we're looking for. R1 con 0 is now available. Press return to get started. Now, there's our banner message of the day, right? Unauthorized access is strictly prohibited. So do we see that? We certainly do. We press enter and we catch that. And now, for some reason, we didn't get the password prompt. And now, if you remember, when we checked back on our status, there was one thing that we missed. And so let's go into privileged exec mode. And this should be, I believe this is let me in. Let me check the password here. Can't remember. Oh, it's a secret. So ITSASECRET. Okay, there we go. So we're in now. So if you remember, I'll do a quick show run here. What did we forget? There was one thing that got overlooked. So the password got set, but we missed one command, and it's the login command. So we'll come back here and we'll type login. And so by typing that, right? Whoops. So by typing that, if you see when we put the login, it says enable password checking. And so that's what we want. We want it to check for the password. And that's the password that we've set. So I'll put login here, and we'll go end, and I'll exit out. So now we see it, so let's see if it works. Perfect. That's exactly what we expected. And so let me make sure I get the password right here. It's let me in. So LETMEIN, and there we are, and we're in. So now if I go into from UserExec mode into privileged exec mode, it's going to ask me again, and it's a secret, and I am in. Okay, so there we go. All right, so why should every router have a message of the day banner? And you'll remember from not only the reading but from lecture, the reason for this is you want to make sure that you have a message up there for legal reasons, making sure that it's clearly stated that your equipment is not to be used by anyone who's not authorized. And this can come into play if you had to take somebody to court for hacking your equipment. So if you are not prompted for a password, what console line command did you forget to configure? And so we just kind of walked through that. It was the login. And so that was actually initially done intentionally so that when we got to here, we could go back and fix that. All right, so enter the password to return to privileged exec mode. We did that. Why would the enable secret password allow access to the privileged exec mode and the enable password no longer be valid? And that's because the enable secret overrides the unencrypted, or I should say just the enable password. So if you configure any more passwords on the router, are they displayed in the configuration file as plain text or in encrypted form? And explain. And so we've entered the service password encryption command, and so that's going to guarantee that any passwords that we enter, perhaps on the VTY lines, those would automatically be encrypted. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if I go into global configuration mode, whoops, and I'll go into line configuration mode. Oops, sorry, VTY 0 to 4. So we're going to configure a password here, and I'll just put in VTY, whoops, password, right? And I'll put it on the login as well, so that when someone tries to log in, that they're going to be presented with that password. Then we'll type end. Okay, so now if I do a show run, when we get down to the VTY lines, you can see that it's automatically encrypted. It does not show me VTY password. It simply shows me the encrypted version of that password. So we know for a fact that since we entered the service password encryption command, which is set higher up in the file, let's see, there it is right there, service password encryption, that tells us that any subsequent passwords that get entered in will automatically be encrypted. And that's a good thing, and you want to make sure that that is what you're doing with your routers. Okay, So we've saved, okay, so save the configuration file. So we did by typing write mem, or you could do copy run start, right? Or you could do write, and that stands for write memory, right? And that does the same thing. Okay, what command did you enter to save the configuration to NVRAM? We just did two, copy RunningConfig to startup config, or write memory. What is the shortest unambiguous version of this command? And so we just saw for both of those, it would be WR, and let's try ME. Yep, so WRME is probably about as short as we can go. Let's see what happens with that. Well, actually, it's W space M, because if I do a W question mark, the only command is right. If I do an M question mark, the only command is W. So literally, I can type W space M, and that is write memory. And let's see if we can do C. How many commands begin with C? CO, COP. So we could do cop, and then we'll type cop RS. So you could do cop RS would be the shortest version of that command. So that's actually pretty interesting, because I'll just type WRIMEM, but it looks like you can get away with simply typing W space M for write memory. And again, this is in PacketTracer. Let me pull in, give me a second here. I'm going to pull in a real router real quickly here. Let me move this back into the frame here. So real quickly, I'm going to pull in a real router, and it's a Cisco 1841, and let me move this guy out and do his own window. Oops, doesn't want to have some routers in. Oh, actually, I know what's going to happen. Actually, my routers right now are unavailable. I've got everything powered off. So we'll check that, and I'll let you know in class. In fact, you can check this in class with the full-blown Cisco IOS to see if, in fact, you can do cop RS or just WM. All right. So which command displays the contents of NVRAM? So if you remember further up, right, when we save this, copy the running configuration to NVRAM. To see NVRAM, we would do show startup config, and as you can see, there is the configuration file that's in NVRAM. If I type show flash, we don't see that in there. And if you look further down here, step number 2 talks about saving the startup configuration file to flash. But as you can see, we don't see that in here, right? So what if I do type dir, right? Shows me flash 0. So that same command is show flash, the dir command, is going to show me just a little more information, right? So we see the length, okay, we see the file number, but it gives you a little more information here. And again, no date on any of these, right? Okay, so verify that all of the parameters configured are recorded. If not, analyze the output and determine which commands were not done and enter them correctly. So we're good. So let's check our results and see what we're looking at here. Take a look at the assessment items, and as you can see, we're 80 out of 80, 10 out of 10. Everything has been configured properly, right? Let me come back down here. So this talks about saving the configuration file, and this is where you can do the copy startup config to flash. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll copy the startup configuration over to flash. So if I do copy startup configuration flash, right? And sure, we'll name it that. Leave it with the same name. So now if I type dir, you can see that we have the startup config has now been saved into flash. Or if I type show flash with a no colon at the end, with just a show flash, you can see that it also will display the contents of flash. All right. So that's it for this PacketTracer activity. Again, this is PacketTracer activity 6.4.1.2, Introduction to Networks for the Cisco Networking Academy. And this has been done for CSI157 Section 841 students at Anne Arundel Community College. All right, I hope that you have found this tutorial helpful, and I will see you all on Tuesday evening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.